Hi, I'm Peg Johnson, owner of Show Clothes Unlimited, and today we're going to be talking about the different ways to use patterns, and so this is called Pattern Hacks and How-Tos. And then we'll start with a simple one. Everyone asks me about princess seaming. It seems that causes them a problem. So we have here a pattern that is princess seamed. This is the front, this is a side front. And I'm just double checking to make sure. Yeah, yep, front, side, front. And people have a tendency to get bent out of shape a little bit, confused, whatever, about getting these to line up. Because when you look at it here with paper pieces, it obviously doesn't go together that way. The other thing is, with lining it up, there are markers, which I've highlighted with the arrows. So pretty much if I start at the bottom, come up, those are pretty well even. But when we come up here, all right, I'm using the outline, the black, so I want that black marker. And here's the other black marker. Well, those look like they don't belong together. And that's the first thing people say is, it doesn't line up. Remember, this is princess seaming. So one thing that you're making a mistake of is this is paper. This is flat. Your finished garment's not going to be flat. Another thing is we need to match this up the way it's going to go together. You are not going to butt these up together like this. You're going to be sewing right sides together. Now see how this all of a sudden it lines up? And I'll move this over just a little bit. And you can see the lines still match up. Now you're going to say, but this still doesn't. That's okay. There's a reason for that. There is a curve here. And this extra between this one and here is called ease. That means that this is fuller than this is. And you have to get it together a little bit to put it so that it lays flat. And so this is what it's going to look like. You can see my red marks. Those are the same marks that are here. And you can see where it doesn't look like it's going to go together at all. One's bigger than the other. That's okay. Because what you're going to do, and remember too, even though you're matching out here, what's important is down here where your seam line is. So with a little bit of manipulation, this bigger part actually will smooth down to the smaller part. See how it's going together? Just a little bit. On non-stretch fabrics, you may actually have to put a small gathering stitch there, put a basting stitch in, and then snug it up just a little bit so that it goes together. But as you can see, it's pretty well gone together. Now another tip is the biggest part always goes against your feed dogs. So you're going to have the side front down against your feed dogs while you stitch. And here it is stitched. It went together. It's okay that it's a little ripply there. We're going to take care of that in a little bit. But it did go together. And when you open it up, where the curve is okay. Now there's different opinions as to how this is supposed to go together. And I wanted to show you a couple things that come up in discussion. One of them is whether or not you should have a wing or a tip or anything sticking up at the end. You need something there. And the way I was taught was if you push this to the front or the center front, center back, you need this to line up. So that when you put your sleeve on, if this is a garment with a sleeve, you have a smooth edge. If you don't do that, I don't know if you can see this little jog right here. That's not going to work. So without that sticking up far enough to go past that corner, this is not going to work. You're going to have to take it out, reset it so that it looks like this one. Now there's several ways you can finish off the inside. These are merely stitched. But as you can see, this is not going to lay flat when we get to the next part. One way to get around that is by serging it. This is going to let it lay pretty flat. Not bad at all. One thing I do want to mention is that once you have created this curve, this piece of the garment is never going to lay flat again. So don't expect it to. If you serge your garment and you want to top stitch, then it comes out quite well. And there is also a discussion as to whether to put it towards the center front or to the side. I usually let the fabric tell me what it will do. As we continue on, if you try to iron, if you try to iron this on a flat surface like your regular ironing board, I don't know if you can see the fold here, but I have ironed in a nice little wrinkle right here. Now we can get around that by using a tailor's ham, presser's ham. It goes by a lot of names. And this simple little thing doesn't look like much. It costs you a whole $5. Just by laying your garment on it. Now this is if you want to press your seams open. And if I had the steam iron, and just press it. When you do that, it comes out like this. Now, another thing is you need to clip the edges. If you don't clip the edges far enough, this is not going to curve. It's not going to lay flat. But that is one way I was taught. The other way was with the serging. And yet another is you take the exact same seam, and I have clipped it. You can see the little clips so that it will curve. But see how evenly that lays? And that's because of using the tailor's ham. And that is why, you know, once you get past a certain age, you're not flat anymore. And it will adhere to the curves of the body. So basics for that is when you're putting it together, start at the bottom, work up to your first notch, do your flag, your tag, whatever you want to call it at the top. Do your pressing, do your top stitching if you want. This segment is how to turn a lined vest. We're using my vest pattern in the lined version. People have had a little bit of difficulty understanding the instructions. My first comment is, if you know a way to do it the way you were learned. There's multiple ways to do it the same way. For our demo purposes, I have created the vest per the instructions, and I have lined it. Now, the bottom is sewn, the armholes are sewn, the neck is sewn. Before you go to the next step, make sure you clip everything that needs to be clipped. Your armholes are curved. Those need to be clipped. The neckline is curved. It needs to be clipped. This is the square front. It needs to be clipped. And it doesn't hurt if you clip here by the zipper either. If you don't clip these particular spots, when you get it turned right side out, what's going to happen is it's going to start to pull, and then you're going to wonder why it doesn't have a nice smooth finish. Now, in order to turn this, and this is going to take a little bit of work, a little bit of time, and this is actually wide enough I can actually get my fingers at least through the shoulder. So if you notice what I did, and it doesn't matter if it's right side up or upside down, I went in through the side, up to the shoulder, and if I could get my hand further in there, I would. I'm going to kind of scrunch this up a little bit till I get a hold of it, and I'm going to pull that right through that shoulder seam. And it's going to be bulky, and it's going to take a few minutes, and it's going to take a little bit of patience. But believe it or not, it actually goes through there. One of the weirdest things you'll probably ever do. You just keep easing it along. It'll come. Doesn't look pretty, and you'll swear that you're making a mistake. But it happens. See, it's starting to come through. And there she is. Well, there's half of it anyway. Still got another side to go. Now, logic would tell you to go in this side and grab that one. Only if I do that, then I'm going to have the two sides sticking out like this. So I'm going to go back in from the same side and go up the other sleeve. I'm sorry, the other shoulder. Till I can get a hold of that. And this one seems to be coming through a little easier. So now we have something weird looking like this, but I think you can still identify the back. And here's your two fronts. So now we just take and grab it and turn it right side out. And all of a sudden, it looks like a vest again. There's the back, right side out. There's the fronts, right side out. Oh dear, we're not attached. So now we have to take the next step. Always start with the outside, or the good fabric, or the outside of your vest. And we're going to pin that together. After I've done this, you're actually going to stitch this. You're going to make sure the lining stays loose. Let it hang out over there by itself. We don't want it involved in this particular sewing. You want to make sure that your seam here matches up with the seam here, that your front and back meet exactly the same. And you don't want any bubbles. If you have bubbles, you need to go back and check your seam allowances. Make sure you stitch them correctly. Now that I have that pinned, I'm going to go ahead and put it in my machine and sew it. And I didn't do a set of that. So we're going to pretend that I sewed this by putting the pins parallel so I don't stab myself. Now you've got two options for finishing off the lining. One of them is that as you stitch your vest, you can continue stitching a good share of your lining. But you have to make sure you leave a hole so that you can turn it, and you are going to have to finish this off by turning the seam allowance in and finishing this off by hand. Now that's the traditional way of doing it. I have another way of doing it, and there's no right or wrong to how you do things. This is the traditional method, and you go and you repeat over there and you're good to go. Then you go ahead and you pull everything out, do your top stitching. I leave the top stitching to the very, very last till I've got everything done. Give it a good press so I don't have any, you don't want it folding up like this. You want it all the way out there. You want it like that. Now, the other way I have to do this is same but different. I have assembled the front pieces just as if I would the other. Now, I did not top stitch the zipper. I want to wait till I'm all done. I like having my top stitching all done at the same time. Nothing wrong with you going ahead and doing this. I zipped it back together because I want this to be a one piece. Now, when you do it this way, I'm sorry, I turned it right side out. You're going to start out with it like this, right sides together. Now before you turn it, make sure you do that clipping again. Do your armhole and your neck edge. This time you are going to sew your armhole, your neck, your zipper, and the bottom. You are not going to sew the side seam. You are not going to sew the shoulder seam. But you are going to turn the front only right side out. Since this is a non-stretch fabric, this would be a really good time to hit this with a steam iron and get it nice and flat. So again, I turn the front right side out. I have not turned the back right side out. But before you want to turn it, clip your neckline, clip your armholes. Again, you are stitched across, partially across the bottom. You have stitched the armholes and the neck and the armhole. The side seam is open. The shoulder seam is open. You have partially sewn the bottom. I start at the side and I come to the first princess seam. This is your center back. And then I start at the other seam and I go out to the edge again. So I have an opening here. You can make it smaller, you can make it bigger. Just make sure you have at least an inch from the edge. This has to be sewn at least an inch in order for us to complete the next step. Now the next step, you're going to think I'm really strange. I start with my outside fabric, my good fabric, my fashion fabric, away from me on the table, the lining towards me. Now I'm going to take the other piece I just showed you and turn it so it's laying basically the same way. My fashion fabric is down, my lining is towards me. I'm going to grip this and that opening, and I'm going to run all the way up to that seam. Now there's a couple steps that you can do here. You can go ahead and finish this up right now, or you can wait till you have everything pulled together and then come back and straighten it out and sew it. The important thing with this is this seam must match up to this seam exactly. No wiggle woggles here. No ifs, ands, or buts. It has to match. And it has to match on both sides. And it has to match across. If there's any bubbles in here, you have not sewn your seam allowances the same distance. And if you didn't, this method is not going to work for you. You have got to have it sewn exactly. Now I'm going to take the other shoulder, again going up through that opening at the bottom of the hem, right on up to its matching shoulder. If you want to check to make sure whether you have this together right, just take a look at your seam. You have the back of your jacket, the fashion fabric, facing the front of your jacket vest, fashion fabric, with the lining against lining. I have no idea what this method is called. I have no idea who created it, and I have no idea how I discovered it. But I love it, because what you get in the end is some beautiful seams on the inside of your vest. Now I know I used the word jacket a couple of times. That was a misnomer. This only works on vests. Now you're going to take and pull your vest up, the front of your vest up into the back, and go to your side seams. You're going to do the exact same thing with your side seam as you did with the shoulder seam. You're going to match that up. It's going to tuck right up into that seam. And hopefully, if my seam allowances were correct all the way through, this seam is going to tuck right into this seam. If it doesn't, stop now and fix it. If this is bubbly, stop now and fix it. Because if you sew a wrinkle into this, turn it right side out, you're going to be turning it wrong side out in order to fix the bubble. So fix it now. Well, it's still easy to move. And do that with the other seam. Then you go ahead and you stitch your side seam. This one's already stuffed. Your side seam, your shoulder seams, the other side seam. The only opening we have now, the only unfinished edge we have now is right here. That opening at the bottom at the back. Now you notice the little red taggies here. That was so I didn't forget to tell myself to make sure I clipped anything that needs to be clipped. Because believe me, once you get this turned right side out, you don't want to come back in and find out you have to clip everything. To turn it right side out, it's quite simple. Just grab the front and ease it out. Just turn this whole thing right side out. As you can see, all the seams are hidden, very neatly finished. Every once in a while, you might have a bubble here or here on the shoulder. If that happened, you didn't get your seam allowances exact, and you need to turn it back wrong side out and go back and fix it. If one of your seams rolled too far, you need to take it back out and fix it. But now you're at the point where you can see that it's pretty much done. Since, again, this is non-stretch fabric, so now I can go ahead and I can hit this with a steam iron and get some really nice edges going on. I can go ahead and finish my zipper, my fold over to my zipper. And like I had mentioned before, I like to top stitch at the end. So now what do I do with that opening at the back? Well, that's pretty easy. You've already established a seam line. So you can just give it a quick turn. And because you've already established your depth, that'll fold right in for you. If you want to finish this right here by hand, you can. Quite often what I will do instead is, since I have it all folded, I'm happy with what's happening here, then I will just top stitch right across it as I'm doing the rest of it. And it's done. Like I said, still have to finish that part. But now it is turned right side out and it's ready to go. This section is on doing the insert at the bottom of the chap leg. Prior patterns did not have this option, and it is something that I offered in my patterns. When you trace your pattern, you will see that there's a line on the pattern. This is your cut line for your wedge. This goes over the instep so that the chap curves over the foot rather than wrinkling. So if this is my chap leg, I'm going to lay this on here, and I will cut that, the length of that line. Once I've done that, then I am going to take the wedge. Now I purposely did this in black so it was visible. Obviously you're going to use the same color as your chap, although it's not visible from the outside once we're done. And what we're going to do is actually spread out that cut and stitch that wedge in there. Now I purposely used white so you could see what I did. That's all it is. It's overlapped and stitched in. Just come up to a point, turn, and you can do that point just by opening up this. It'll get the wrinkle out of your way. And then just stitch down the other side. Once you do this, this chap leg will never lay flat again. Don't try to make it lay flat. It's not going to happen. If you alter the leg at all, then you're going to have to alter your cuff. Because this cuff was designed to fit that wedge. If you do make a deeper stitch on this wedge, it may not fit as tight and you may have to do some changes. But once you cover it up, this is what it looks like on the inside. There's your wedge. And that's what it looks like on the outside. You can't even tell that wedge is there. But notice how it's not going to lay flat. It's not meant to. It's meant to go over your instep. Now, the Horsemanship shirt neck collar is slightly different than anything else you've ever done, and it seems to be causing a few problems with people. So we are going to go through that. One of the things that people find confusing, maybe, is the fact that we work inside out. And that is because we want the top stitching at the very last stage to be on the outside of the garment rather than the inside. In all the times classes I was taught, and classes I taught, and with the different patterns, you will be asked to start on the outside, roll the collar to the inside, turn it under, and either hand stitch or top stitch, and that may or may not give you a good finish on the outside. This gives you a good finish on the outside. There are marks that tell you the shoulder seams and the center front. If you put those marks together, or even if you take the center front, you will see that one edge is longer than the other. So one of the things I do after I did the interfacing on is I will go ahead and mark this. It's just a pencil mark, but it is an arrow. That tells me that's the part that's going to wrap around to the right hand side of my neck, across my right shoulder, and across the right hand zipper. That has helped me tremendously, because now I know that because when you have, the two halves, you have two collar stands that are interfaced. How do you know which one goes which way? This makes it easy. And I purposely do this with, here's the front. I open this up. This is my back. So therefore, if I was on that side of the camera, I would be looking at this, and this would be my right hand side. I know that this arrow is the part that extends past that edge. And it might be where people are getting confused, because this does extend further. They're used to it lining up with the zipper. This one does not line up with the zipper. You want that notch in the collar to be center front. And it's just a matter of pinning it together, following directions. And the directions say that you want, I'd have to look at the directions, whether it's a 1/4 inch past the zipper. This is so you can stitch it later on. If this doesn't fit this way, you may have shrunk it, you may have cut it wrong, or you may not have stretched it. Sometimes when you put the interfacing on the collar stand, especially with some certain lycras, it shrinks them. And so it's okay if you need to just give it a little bit of stretch. The interfacing will handle it. It's not a big deal. And that might give you a better look. But I want another thing to notice is that you have the wrong side of the fabric up. You also have the wrong side or the inside of the collar stand up. You're going to think this is all wrong. Trust the system. It's okay. This is the same piece. But now I got it stitched on. And now I turn it up. Again, you're going to panic and think that's wrong. Nope, this is good. We're right. We're okay. But one thing I would like you to take a look at is match up your shoulder seams and see where the notch for the center front is. Now, you may have lined up this, your line for the center front, but it doesn't mean your notch is in the right place. And quite often I've found that I didn't cut this accurately. So this is my double check. Instead of thinking I did something wrong when my collar comes off lopsided, I do this check. Shoulder seams together, make sure center front's the center front, and make sure that that curve, that V-neck, is actually in the center. And I will go ahead and trim it because I have had some that I folded and that V is actually way over here. Now, obviously I did something wrong if it was over there, but it's easy to fix. Just make a little curve and you're good. The next step, go ahead and finish off your collar pieces. Interface them, stitch them, turn them, and top stitch them. So they're good to go. The instructions say for you to take the loose stand and attach the collars. It also tells you to stitch 1/8 of an inch. This 1/8 of an inch right here is simply to hold the collar to the collar stand so when you're working with it for the next step, it doesn't slip down. And then it's so frustrating if this slides down because this is 1/8 of an inch and the seam allowance is 1/4 inch. So you're never going to see that stitching. I start where the zipper should be and work forward. Your collar should be equal distance from the V. Now if you look at this V, it's not quite square, so I really should trim that up before I go to the next step. But that is this is how the instructions say to do it. I have a preferred way, of course. I am a very visual person. Therefore, I'm going to take my collar. Remember that we turned that collar stand up, but we're still working on the inside. And I'm going to make sure that the butt of my collar lines up where I want it to. And then I'm going to stitch at the 1/8 of an inch. It's the same idea as this, other than it's already attached to your shirt. In the instructions, those collar pieces wouldn't be there, and then you would go ahead and put this on like that. This one is a little easier, I think, because it's already down. You already know it's going to line up with your zipper where you want it to, and it's good to go. Still working from the inside. You can see that this is sandwiched. We've turned the collar stand up. We've applied our collar. Now we have the other collar stand. And at this point, trim your corners. I didn't trim my corners, so shame on me. And turn it right side out. You are now working on the outside or front side of your shirt. Okay, it's starting to look like a collar and collar stand. And all I'm doing is finger pressing this at this point. Gently ironing this will help. You want to iron this seam up into the neck edge. And then you're going to turn this edge under so that it matches that prior stitching seam. The idea is to stitch over that previous seam. And by doing this from the right side of the shirt, you get the top stitching that's completely neat. So if you miss the back side a little bit, nobody's going to care. This just turns in and up and over, and you stitch it just like you would the rest of it. And then the finished product looks like this. You've stitched on the outside, you've top stitched it around. You've got your extra piece there like you're supposed to have. On the inside, you see I wasn't very straight. So I missed it here, got it there, missed it there, got it there. So this is not going to affect the wearing of it. But can you imagine that on the outside instead of looking like this? So this is why it was done this way. Then you just turn your collar down like it's supposed to go. Tack it down, add your Velcro, and finish off your shirt. And this can be done at any stage. It was just done at this stage so there wasn't a lot of fabric hanging out, getting in my way. This is the front zip pleasure shirt, and some people have had a little bit of problems with the collar on this one, so we're going to do this collar too. Very similar to the Horsemanship shirt collar, other than it goes in the front, and the collar is collar stand and collar as opposed to a collar stand and two pieces of collar. Again, starting on the inside of your garment. And I know this messes with you big time. It did me for the first 4 or 5 shirts that I did. And then all of a sudden it was like, wow, I like that. So again, you don't have to worry about center front. You only have to worry about your seam allowance between the zipper and the raw edge. Again, the zipper and the raw edge. Stitch that on. Turn it right side up. Yes, this is still the inside. And yes, this is still the inside of the shirt, but it is the fashion fabric. As with the Horsemanship shirt, the instructions probably say to attach the collar to the loose collar stand and then do the next step. Again, I prefer putting the collar to the body. So I make sure I'm off the corners, my seam allowance. And with this gold and black, sometimes it's hard to see, but there's still the correct seam allowance there. I have turned my collar up. So you can see there's the shirt, the collar stand, standing up, and I have attached my collar. You go ahead and stitch that down. The next step is tricky but not hard, and once you get used to it, it's not such a big deal. So here we have the collar stand facing, which is what they call it now. It was the first piece we put on. You have sandwiched your collar in between. I have already stitched, but you will pin this together. And when you get ready to stitch it, you're going to pull your collar back out of the way. See how it kind of scrunches up right there? Don't worry about that. Just get it out of your way. And you're going to stitch that seam allowance right straight up here. Turn at the corner, go across, catching everything. Turn, come down, get your collar out of your way again. And stitch it. From this point, just like with the other one, if you want a nice collar, trim your edge, turn, hold, and turn. Same over here. Turn it in, and then you get a good turn. Now you're working on the outside. Same thing, you're working on the outside. Doesn't hurt to hit it with a little bit of steam. Fold that down. Cover up your previous stitching. You can see it's going pretty good just with my finger pressing it. And because you've got your seam allowance there, this will turn right up and in and behave itself. This one's not stitched, but see how I've got it pinned. This is matching up here. Got a nice finish here. Then I will top stitch this all the way around, just like we did with the other shirt. Then when you're done, I forgot, this is a front zip, so we're going to go this way. Then you finish putting it together, your side fronts to the front, side backs to the back, sleeve on, stitch it down, tack your collar where you want it, and this shirt's good to go. This is a button-down shirt, and it has plackets on the front for the buttons. This is not a zip front, this is a button front. You can substitute snaps for any of these buttons, and this can be a Western shirt with a yoke. It can be a plain shirt with no yoke, and you can also take this, not put the collar on, use the collar stand, and it can become an English shirt. And honestly, if you leave the yoke off, you just use the collar stand, you've got yourself an English shirt. I designed this shirt basically for the rodeo crowd. And what we've got is yokes that they can be going the same as the rest of the shirt, or they can be contrast like this is. I didn't want to worry about lining up because although this looks like a nice straight pattern, if you look, there's, two, and then a small line and a fat line, a wide space, small line, space, and it's not exact. It's not like it was all straight lines. And it's something you wouldn't notice until you had cut the yoke And you might find that you have the double going over the single, and I didn't want to do that, so I cheated. I put it on the angle, so it doesn't matter how it goes. But before I get to that spot, you have to actually create the yoke. And that's not so hard. You have the yoke pattern, and basically you just turn under the prescribed amount and pin it down. And this is where, if you're gonna be flirty and fabulous, you're going to attach your fringe. Now, if you only want fringe over the shoulders, then you wait till you get to the shoulder, to the sleeves. But if you want it down your back, then you're going to go ahead and attach this so that you got it going. You're probably going to have to clip this so it will take the V, or put a dart in it. And then this works for the queen candidates, the princesses, the barrel racers that want the glitter and glam, or anybody else that wants to just have fun with it. So once we've done that, and I will top stitch this, in order to get this on the shirt evenly, I will use a temporary adhesive spray. Keep this away from your garment. Use it on the yoke only, on the back side. Make sure you have a lot of paper underneath of it. Spread out. This spray spreads. Or at least in a what they call a shadow box, where you drop this down into a box and spray within the box. And it doesn't have to be heavy. It only has to be tacky. Just so that it sticks. So that when you put it on, and you also want to make sure that you have the dip in the center of the back. If you don't, that might be an issue. Then pin it down and stitch all the way around it. Now I go ahead and I stitch the armholes and the shoulders and the neck. I want to make sure it's not going to shift at all. I also don't want any loose edges when I go to put the collar on and things like that. So that and the front yokes are put on the same way. Again, usually you don't put the fringe on the front, because anybody that's barrel racing, they don't want the fringe whipping them in the face. So just a note. Before you go to put the placket on your shirt, you have to hem your bottom. Follow the directions as to hemming it. This is just a double roll, so it's nothing, no big deal. But this has to be done before you can add the placket. You can put the pieces together and hem it. If you're brave, you can just take the front like I did, do my double roll, and go ahead and put my placket on now. In the instructions, the placket is the last thing done. Now again, I don't know about you guys, but when I was taught to put plackets on, I started on the outside, rolled to the inside. So this placket kind of messed with my head a little bit. But we worked through it. Follow directions. And that is, you have your shirt right side up, and you put the right side, the correct side, the outside, the whatever you want to call it, right side of your fabric to the inside of your shirt. And that sounds like that's going to be a mistake, but it's not. With this shirt, it's extremely important that you follow the seam allowances. If you don't follow this, when you go to put your collar and collar stand on, they're not going to fit. I found that out the hard way. I did it. I did my own thing. I didn't read the directions. Now I read the directions. Make sure you got that seam allowance, what you want. Once you have done this, come down here to the bottom, and you will stitch across. See where my bottom of my hem is? You will stitch across here. This produces a really slick bottom finish to your placket. So we do that. I turned it up, turned it in, and I have a really nice square bottom that lines right up with that without having the extra bulk. Now there's a fold line, so you can iron that. You will use the iron on this placket probably more than you would do any other garment that you're using. And believe me, it helps so much to use the iron. Your raw edge gets folded into the placket. Got my fold mark, and see, I use my iron, so you can, I don't know if you can see that crease there or not, but I know that's where I'm supposed to fold it. So you fold it, and I'm bringing it to the right side of the fabric. And it's narrow. Well, this is a child, so it's going to be more narrow than an adult. Again, like any other time, you want that over your prior stitching, and you're going to stitch real close to the edge. This bottom is going to fold right up inside for you. Make sure you back stitch down here, so if you put any pressure on it, you don't pull your stitches out, which I have a tendency to do. I put pressure on it and I break the hold it has. And you just do that all the way up. And if you're not exact, you may have to re-iron it just a touch. And then when you're ready, you top stitch it. You can go down across the bottom if you want. You don't have to, but I did. Just make sure that that stays put. Then you do your markings, you put your buttons or your snaps on. Another thing with the collar stand, I have been reading and people are saying do not put snaps on the collar stand. Keep that a button. Even if you use snaps all the way down here, keep your collar stand a button. Now, people have asked me about a placket button cover-up or a button cover-up. So here we go. All I did was cut an extra piece of the placket. I did not interface this. This is wimpy. This is the same weight as the rest of the shirt. It's not stiff and solid like my placket. Now, contrary to what the instructions are, because this is on the outside, I have to start on the outside. So this is exactly opposite of what we just did with the regular placket. Go ahead and stitch one edge of your placket and the cover up onto your shirt like you're supposed to. Just kind of pretend that that's not there. It's just an extra piece. Just go ahead and stitch it down. Once again, when you get, remember too, it has to be hemmed. Now, it may extend down past your hem. Don't let that worry you. Go ahead and stitch across just like you did on the other one. And then when you get ready, you will turn it to the inside. That was supposed to be stitched. Turn it to the inside. Fold it in half. Now I'm going to pin this lengthwise because I want to show you the final result, what it's going to look like. Normally I pin perpendicular. Now the only thing I found with this is I haven't figured out how to top stitch it all the way around. So you can top stitch this edge, pull this up out of the way. I guess you could come over here and top stitch it. But you're going to stitch, and that stitch is going to show on the outside, and hopefully it stitches where it won't be too terribly visible. Like I said, you might be able to pull this up out of your way and top stitch down through here, but I didn't find it to be an issue. So this is what it's going to look like before you stitch the last half of the placket. You've got this loose, and you've got your placket. And after you've stitched it, now I went ahead and I top stitched this on top of the loose placket, the button cover up, so that I had that stitching. And you go ahead and add your buttons, your buttonholes, or your snaps, and then this covers it up. Lots of pressing with that one. We're doing a separate section on the button-down shirt again. This is involving the sleeves and the cuffs. This particular pattern has a two-piece sleeve, which seems to boggle a few people. And so now we have a how-to and a hack for it. There's really nothing special about a two-piece sleeve. This one was made two pieces so that it was easier for beginners to do the, I don't know what you call it, where the sleeve meets. This has to be rolled back so that you have a finished edge. So we created a two-piece sleeve. If you look at this, they overlap a little bit. See how this is squared off right here? That's your seam allowance, so that when this goes together and is stitched, this is a smooth edge. And like I said, the seam is there, and you will stitch together down to the mark. From here down, you want it left open. Now, for those who don't know, these markings mean that you need to fold your sleeve over and create an open dart. It's a fold. That again takes the width of the sleeve that you need for moving around with barrel racing and like that down to the cuff. So this is what it looks like. You've stitched it down, and all I did was do a double roll. So 1, 2. And as you can see on this side, it didn't hold. As you can see on this side, I just stitched up to this point, and then I would have gone down that point, but I wanted to show you that if you are going to insert arm fringe, before you stitch that sleeve, this is where you want to put it. So this would have been stitched into that sleeve, which is another reason that that was there, so that you could get the arm fringe if you wanted arm fringe. You'll have to sew both seams before you can put your cuff on. So here you can see I got one seam, I've got the other seam. I have stitched my fold back for the sleeve. And this opening is here so you can get your wrist down through it. Get your hand and your wrist down through it. And this is pretty straightforward. Inside out, you put the right side of the cuff to the wrong side of the shirt and stitch it, leaving your 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch seam allowance, whatever the allowance is. Then you merely turn it up. Whoops, I'm sorry. While it's still that way, you fold it. Make sure you don't catch this in it, and stitch from the fold down. You don't want to stitch from here up in case it's off a little bit. You need it to be able to go somewhere. So you stitch that down, and you stitch this down. Now I clip my corner here. You don't have to, I just do usually after I've stitched it. Turn your collar, or I'm sorry, turn your cuff right side out. Now if you want to, you can go ahead and go to the right side of your fabric. So I will turn this right side out. This is now the right side of my, and I forgot, remember that fold I told you about? That's right here. When you're holding your hand, it is on the outer edge here and the outer edge here. If you put it here, it's in the wrong spot. Now, just like any other, push that down into the cuff. Turn this edge. And these are fairly narrow cuffs. It's supposed to be 2 buttons. Again, this is a child's version, so it is a little bit smaller. And you'll see the finished ones later on. And since this is only pinned, this is not going to be a happy camper. Again, top stitch from the outside, so everything's neat. Before you do that, you might want to hit this with an iron. Make sure that you've got it folded down. You don't have anything folded up here you don't want folded up. Make sure that's over the stitching line. It's all laying flat. Hit it with an iron before you top stitch it. Now the pattern hack. You don't want that seam. So you take your 2 pattern pieces and overlap them the seam allowance, pin them, and you cut this as 1. But remember, you still have to do this. You still have to have that slice right there. So this is what it's going to look like when you get done. You have one sleeve, 1-piece sleeve. You do the exact same thing. You do the double roll for the sleeve opening. Now if you don't want to do this, you can cut, I believe it's a 2-inch wide strip of fabric, the length of the inverted V, and you can stitch it, fold it over, turn the edge under, and stitch that there. You'll see that on a lot of men's shirts. But this is the way we happen to do this one. So that's folded. This is what I just said, where you have a strip. So here's my sleeve, here's the strip, and I stitched it, folded it up and over, and stitched it down. So this side is loose. This is what it looks like before. This is what it looks like after. Some people prefer this, and there's nothing wrong with going either way with it. After that, it's the same as the other shirt. You pin it together, make sure that your fold is where it belongs. Turn it up, iron it, make sure there's nothing up there. And then you have the finished cuff. Always make sure that fold goes towards the opening. And that cuff is always going to button to the outside of your wrist. So always make sure that you got it on the right way. Put your buttons or snaps on and you are good to go. These patterns come with child size 2 through an adult 24 all in one packet. I don't want to cut it out to say a size 12 or a 14 and lose everything else on the sides of it and lose all those other sizes and have to buy another pattern. Therefore, I'm going to trace it. And in order to do that, you need tracing fabric. There are several types available and everybody will argue over their favorite, so you decide what you like. This is called True Grid. This is bought at Joann Fabrics, and because these are 1-inch squares, that's why it's called a True Grid. It's very handy when you're doing your pattern because you can put the straight grain of fabric marker on one of these lines, and it doesn't matter whether it's up and down or left or right, as long as it's straight. And that's going to be very important later on when we're laying out your fabric. This is actually called tracing fabric, and it doesn't look much different other than it doesn't have the lines. This was from Walmart, and I doubt that you can see it with the camera, but it looks like somebody took a paintbrush and splattered paint on it. There's little tiny flecks all over it. With this one, you have to mark your straight grain of fabric, and there are tons of other items you can use. You can use paper bags, you can use newsprint, Swedish tracing paper, medical exam paper. I know people who use gift wrap paper. All of those can be used quite well. My preference for these two types is that I could actually put them together or sew them together and then try them on my person and make sure that it fits. That's the only advantage that I see with what I choose to use. These patterns come with child size 2 through an adult 24 all in one packet. I don't want to cut it out to say a size 12 or a 14 and lose everything else on the sides of it and lose all those other sizes and have to buy another pattern. Therefore, I'm going to trace it. And in order to do that, you need tracing fabric. There are several types available and everybody will argue over their favorite, so you decide what you like. This is called True Grid. This is bought at Joann Fabrics, and because these are 1-inch squares, that's why it's called a True Grid. It's very handy when you're doing your pattern because you can put the straight grain of fabric marker on one of these lines, and it doesn't matter whether it's up and down or left or right, as long as it's straight. And that's going to be very important later on when we're laying out your fabric. This is actually called tracing fabric, and it doesn't look much different other than it doesn't have the lines. This was from Walmart, and I doubt that you can see it with the camera, but it looks like somebody took a paintbrush and splattered paint on it. There's little tiny flecks all over it. With this one, you have to mark your straight grain of fabric, and there are tons of other items you can use. You can use paper bags, you can use newsprint, Swedish tracing paper, medical exam paper. I know people who use gift wrap paper. All of those can be used quite well. My preference for these two types is that I can actually put them together or sew them together and then try them on my person and make sure that it fits. That's the only advantage that I see with what I choose to use. Interfacing is what gives your collar the support that it needs in order to stay stiff. As you can see, when I fold this, it has pretty stiff. It doesn't want to fold when I want it to fold. I'm going to have to iron it if I want it to fold. This one happens to be fusible. There's a shiny side to it. I don't know if you can see it or not. That is heat activated glue. When I put this on my jacket, I will put that against the fabric and use an iron on here, and that will affix it for me. And that saves a lot of issues with it coming loose, bunching up in the collar. If it's fused, you don't have that problem. Fabric that you use is determined by the pattern. And in order to find out what you need to use, you actually need to go to the pattern itself. And we'll cover this later. But obviously, before you can start doing your jacket, you must have your fabric. I really want to emphasize here, and you'll hear it 10,000 times through the video, use fabric appropriate based upon what the pattern recommends. If you don't, it's not going to fit right, it's not going to hang right, and you just wasted your time and money. So do it right the first time, follow the recommendations. Use polyester thread because most of these fabrics that we're using for this have a lycra base in them. Polyester stretches, cotton does not. Cotton has lint, and that affects your machine, so that's why we use the polyester. Obviously, you need scissors. Good quality scissors. Make sure they're sharp. I like to have a little pair too because I can clip my threads at the machine. My machine doesn't have a cutter on it, so I have to use my threads. Now, a tape measure is really important. And people laugh at me when I show them this. Different tape measures are made differently. Some of them have the clip right here at the end, so you know that from this point to this point really is an inch. But you'll see some with a tag out here and then the metal piece out here. And if you use that as your measuring point, then you have actually mismeasured your person for your measurements. So whatever tape measure you use to take the measurements with, that's the same one you need to do when you're applying it to the pattern and everything. If someone else is measuring the person and sending you the measurements, make it clear, maybe even ask them to send you a photo of what their tape measure looks like, because that little bit of difference will affect a whole lot in the jacket. With the princess seams, there's 6 seams on there. And if you add a 1/4 inch to each one of those seams, you have actually added 2 sizes to that jacket. So you don't want to be doing that. Obviously you need pins, and I also created a measuring chart. We're going to start with how to read patterns. I was surprised that not too many people knew how to read patterns. On the back of the envelope, there's all kinds of information. Problem is, most people don't know how to read it. So let's start with the measuring chart. We're going to take the measurements here in a few minutes. And in this chart, it shows you measurements of this, this, and this are this size. And one thing I do want to show you is the women's size 6 has a bust 30.5, waist 23, and a hip of 32.5. While the child's size 12 has almost the exact same measurements, 30, 25.5, and 32. So there is definitely an overlap in the sizing. But if you look, the women's is made for someone who is developing a bust, where a child is usually thicker through the waist. And that is why you have to decide based upon your own person, the person you're making it for, and what their body shape is, which one of these is a better fit to cut your jacket out of. And you'll also notice that the pattern says, do not follow ready-to-wear sizing. Ready-to-wear sizing and patterns don't correlate at all. They are nothing alike. Use it as a number. It's a guide. Don't take it personally if you wear a size 3 or 4 in ready-to-wear and you wear a 15 or 16 in the pattern. It's a number. It's just a number to identify it. Also on the back of the envelope, we'll tell you what is a thing called notions, and basically that's your fabric and other things that I've already discussed, the thread and like that, and zippers. And this particular pattern requires stretch fabric requires 10 to 50% crosswise stretch. That means that 10 inches of fabric will stretch to 15. And 11 to 15. So it's got a lot of stretch in it. So if you do a jacket with no stretch, this jacket's not going to fit you the same as one if you use the proper fabric. It also tells you what type of fabric, recommended fabrics. And usually those are twills, stretch twills, gabardines, bengaline, products that are heavy enough to stand up to appliques but have the lycra stretch in it for what you need. Now inside, this particular pattern has the fabric requirements on the inside, on the instruction sheet. Usually it's on the outside. Most patterns it's on the outside, but because there's so many options with this one, they have really gone. And this is what it looks like in the page. But don't panic, because I blew it up just to give you an idea. So if we were doing view A, and the fabric is 45 inch, the print, and I'm doing a size 14, then I'm going to need this much. And because this has 2 colors on it, there's also a solid view A, and I need that much of the other color. This is your guide. If you want to do this all one solid color, you just add those 2 numbers together. Pattern pieces. How do you know what to use for pattern pieces once you get this open? Well, this is what the pattern comes like. Remember that in there is size 2 through size 24 for all people. And enjoy that little packet right now while you can, because once you open it up, you'll never get it back in the envelope again. Just accept that. That's the way it is. A machine folds these. And as you can see, as I'm coming out, you can see the different pattern pieces start to emerge. But I still don't know which ones I want to use. And so in order to do that, I have to go to my instruction sheet. And it shows me. If I'm doing an adult, for my front, I'm going to use this piece. If I'm doing a child's, I'm going to use this piece. And then you just follow down around, and it will tell you what pattern number pieces you need for whichever piece of jacket or view of jacket that you're going to be using. It sounds confusing, but a simple walkthrough is not so bad. Just read it all through, try to understand it, and you'll be good. In order to determine your zipper length, you need to measure from the base of your throat to the bottom of your jacket. Some people want the zipper to go all the way to the bottom. Others want it to stop an inch or 2 inches even from the bottom. It's a totally personal preference. There's no right or wrong about that. And it's just simply up to you. There are several types of zippers. This is a coil zipper. And if you look at here, you can see that this is a coil. This is a number 3 coil. I'm sorry, that's a number 5 coil. This one you may not be able to see as well. This one's a number 3. If I put the two together, you can see that one is much finer than the other one. This is a number 5 molded plastic. The problem with this one, in my opinion, tons of people use them. This is very hard to get a covered zipper out of. And if you have to shorten the zipper, you have to be very careful you don't hit these teeth with your needle. If you hit these teeth with your needle, you will break it. These molded zippers are less forgiving shape-wise than the 3 or the 5 coil. See how soft these drape? This one doesn't drape quite so easily. And when it's going down the front of your body, it will actually buckle because of its own weight with the teeth meshed the way they are. If you cannot find a zipper the right length for what the pattern calls for or you want, buy one that's longer. You can usually buy the coil zippers in the local fabric store up to a size 18 inch. From 18 inch on, you are stuck with the molded ones. Therefore, if you want an 18 inch or longer zipper, you need to order it online, either from wawak.com or zipperstop.com, or if you have a favorite place that does have them. But most big box stores only carry the molded plastic ones after the size 18. There are some sewing terms I want you to understand before we get going. Princess seaming is a shirt or a jacket that has seams coming down over the bust and your shape is built there. Some people think that's a lot better fit than if you try to do darts. Darts are where you take the fabric and it is folded and comes up to the bust or to the side and takes the fabric in. It's like that. The only problem with that is getting them centered, getting the same length, and not having them buckle. It takes practice. For lack of a better word, it just takes practice to get a dart. Some people prefer darts, some people prefer the princess seaming. A facing on a jacket is something that goes on the inside. This shirt has a facing. There's no raw edges here. And that is a personal preference thing. The pattern comes with a facing. I don't use it. That's why I have to say it's a modified version. I can get a nice finished edge inside without the facing and without the added bulk. Depending on your fabric, you may want to have the facing. If you know you're going to have that shirt open or jacket open and it's going to be open this way, so it's going to be exposed, you're going to want to use the facing. Most of these show jackets are zipped to the neck, so it's something you don't have to worry about. Seam allowance is very, very, very important. Every pattern has a seam allowance, and you need to read the instructions to find out what it is, because if you use the wrong seam allowance, it's not going to fit. Remember I said there were 6 seams going on? You add or subtract a little bit on each one of those seams, then it's not going to fit. These are exactly the same size, but as you can see, there is a difference in where they come across. This is a quarter, this is a half, this is a 5/8. Doesn't look like too much difference. But when I actually open these up and lay them over the top of each other, don't know how well you can see it, but there's that much difference in these pieces that started out exactly the same size. Very important to make sure your seam allowances are what the product calls for. You know, your fabrics. Some of the fabrics are stretchy. This one is one that fits what the pattern called for. This is a two-way stretch. See how it goes really nice and stretches nice that way? It doesn't do anything this way. This one has itty bitty bit of stretch and nothing that way. So this one's a better piece than this one. This one is a twill, has no stretch at all. So if I have a jacket made of twill, and I will show you what the difference is when it gets done. But you can see that there's absolutely nothing going on with that one. Therefore, you've got to use the product the pattern calls for. Remember, I told you the different spaces that we need. You're going to measure the fullest part of the bust. And this gal is at almost 36. And I make sure that you measure over whatever they're going to wear. So if they're going to wear a sports bra as opposed to a tankini, if they're going to wear a push-up bra and a tank top over it, make sure they're wearing that when they get measured. You're going to drop down to the natural waist. And I have a habit of also having my finger in here, which adds to the width just an ounce. But that accounts for the people who hold their breath while you're measuring them. They need to breathe naturally. If anything, exhale so that you get the full body, especially through the waist. The natural waist, a lot of kids will try to get you to push it down, but you want it over the belly button. That is the natural waist. The hips is the fullest part of the butt. And some people have no butt, some people have a big butt. It's just the way it is. Now remember I talked about across the shoulders. If they have a shirt on, find their natural where the body fits the arm. And you can kind of, there's usually a bit of a crease there. And you're going to measure across there. Now you notice I'm way up here. That's because that's where your greatest movement is. If I go up here, some people measure up here, and that's fine. You can do that. I go with this just because of the way the pattern is. Decide, find that bone at the back of their neck. Decide how long you want it to be. Now with the jackets, it's also very important to find the natural waist again. So you're going to measure from the bone of the neck to the natural waist. This comes into play when you adjust your jacket. You see all those jackets out there with a big bulge right here. You know, the gal picks her arm up and you get a bulge right here. That bulge is created because the length of the person's actual body compared to the length made by the pattern are different. You have to alter that pattern to fit this adjustment. The same as if the pattern goes to a 36 to a 38 and they're a 37, 38 is going to be too big, 36 is going to be too small. So that's why you have to have these measurements. Now I don't have an arm on my poor gal, so this is kind of visual for you. If you're having someone else measure for you, go from their underarm out to their wrist. Professionals will go from here to the shoulder down with their arm bent. If someone else is measuring for you and you never see them, it is really difficult to make sure that they are measuring the same place you are measuring. That is why I always go with the underarm to the wrist. Other people will measure from the shoulder down with the elbow bent. Same reason I don't do that. I don't see the people. I don't know if they're starting here, 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 or out here. I want to know exactly, so I go from under here. If this is a plus-sized person, you're going to have more measurements. You're going to have to measure the upper bust and the lower bust. This will give you the shape that you need. And once a woman gets into D, E, F, and up cup sizes, then there's a whole lot of alterations that I can't even begin to tell you how to do because I'm still learning that. Just know that so that you don't expect the pattern to be the be-all and end-all. As there are more fitting problems, the more it's going to have to go into a customized garment. Now, you've got your measurements. Thing that you need to remember is to add 2 inches seam allowance to the sleeve and the bottom of the jacket. If you don't do that, when you cut out your jacket, when you go to hem it, you've got nothing there to hem. Make sure you do a +1 or +2. You can have a 1 inch or a 2 inch hem allowance. That way you will always make sure you cut the right length. Here we have my gal's measurements. And according to these measurements, she's going to take the size 14. Now they're not exact because her bust was 36, her waist was 29. This calls for 28, so she's larger than this pattern. And her hips are 38, which is right on the money with this pattern. Therefore, I'm going to start with a size 14. Then I'm going to have to customize it to fit her. Number 1 rule, never have Lycra fall off the end of your table. It pulls and it will affect the stretch of your fabric and does affect your end product. And my fabric just went cascading off the end of my table. We don't want that. It will pull. Doesn't seem like much, but it does. Regardless of the layout that is in the pattern, I have made it a habit to do this a very specific way. Most of your fabrics, it won't matter if you put one piece this way and one piece this way. But you're going to get the one time you're not paying attention and you're going to find out that this has a very definite nap to it where the one color goes this way and the other color goes this way. And when you put them together, it's very, very, very obvious. Therefore, whenever I do my patterns, everything that goes towards the head of the body, shoulders, top of the sleeve, top of the princess seaming, those panels, everything that goes towards my face goes towards the same part of my fabric. And it doesn't matter if you do them all this way or if you do them all this way, as long as everything that's up is headed the same way. If you get in that habit, you'll never get caught with your product looking weird. Except for the collar, none of this pattern is on a fold, which is kind of unusual, except remember I told you that the back has a shape to it. If the back was straight down then you could put it on a fold. But that's another reason that sometimes people have that bubble in the back. They don't pay attention to the instructions. They don't pay attention that this has to be cut. It cannot go on the fold. Remember I talked about the straight grain of fabric? And sometimes somebody will have a jacket that just doesn't hang right and you can't figure out what's wrong with it. The problem is they didn't take the time to make sure it's straight. Fabric has, even knit fabric, even Lycra, has an up and down thread and a cross thread. And if you go scattywonk across the threads, then it's not going to hang properly. It has to go the way the threads go. Now, some of these fabrics you have to watch. This one has the stretch. This way. This is your selvage edge where it goes through the machine. You always want the greatest stretch around the body. Therefore, this one's folded correctly. If you use the jumbo lycra, you're going to find yourself folding it the other way, because for some reason when jumbo lycra is created, the stretch is in the length. So therefore you have to fold it the other way. Now remember back to when I told you about the straight grain of fabric. Assuming that this is folded neatly. Okay, my edges are really smooth here. They match up. They're not wonky. Never worry about this end of the fabric. You don't know who cut it, whether they cut it straight. If this is off, you know, mine happens to match up, but I've had some where this is like ½ inch difference. Don't worry about here. Worry about here. Worry about that selvage edge and the folded edge. If it lays smooth like this does, you're going to be good. If you got bumps and lumps, it's not laying right. If you cut it that way, you're going to have problems. If this has folds from being on the bolt, then you need to get a wet towel and toss it in the dryer and try to get those folds out. If you create the garment with those folds when you cut it, that little bit that it's folded, it's going to throw things off. People ask me about washing and drying their fabrics. If I'm doing a jacket, I generally do not wash my fabric first. If I'm doing a jacket with pants, then I will absolutely wash and dry my fabric. Much of this product with lycra in it has a shrink factor. You can lose as much as 3 to 4 inches per yard. You do not want to create a garment and then have it shrink 3 inches. You will have somebody very unhappy with you, whether it's your own child or a customer. So that's my guideline. Once these jackets are embellished, you're not washing them, you're not drying them, you're spot cleaning them. And that is how they need to be done, because dry cleaners won't touch the rhinestones because the solvent eats the glue and they'll come off. Some of the leathers that are used will fade, will bleach out and bleed into your product. They don't want that liability. That is why jackets are Febrezed. If you get a stain on them, the Blue Dawn dish soap with a sponge will get the stain out. And you seriously just spot clean these things as necessary. If they get stinky, then you're going to have to use the Dawn on the underarms and that. And don't soak it. You just do enough to get what you need out. Anyway, back to the fabrics. I have a line here, and that's my straight grain of fabric. And I can feel something underneath there, so that's why I'm going underneath there. It was a pin. Might not affect something, might affect it greatly. Now, how do I know if this is straight or not? Here's my tape measure. And I will go from that arrow up to my edge. This one is just past 7.5. Now that one turned out to be straight. Therefore, I can go ahead and pin this down and know it's going to stay straight. Put a couple pins in it so it can't shift. Then you can go ahead and do whatever you want to. You can use your weights, you can do more pinning, whatever you want, but you know that this is going to be straight and you're going to be fine. And you do that with the next one and the next one. And when you get closer to the selvage edge, then go ahead and measure from there in. But make sure you measure. You don't want a sleeve that twists. Have you ever seen somebody that had a shirt or a jacket and the sleeve twists around their arm? That's because it wasn't on the straight grain of fabric. And yes, I harp on that a lot. But if you're going to do this, you're going to put the time into it. You want to do it right. While you have your fabric out and you have your pattern on it, go this way because it's more convenient. If you can tell the right and wrong side of your fabric, you don't have to do this next step. I just got in a really big habit of doing this every single time. It's another one of those. If you do it every time, then you always do it and you don't catch yourself off guard. Say that I want the outside of this fabric to be the outside of my jacket. When I take this pattern piece off, when I cut it, I'm going to take a pin and stick it in here. Then I'm going to bring this side up and do the same thing to the pattern piece on that side. I have outside and outside. Inside stays inside. And that way I know every single time that when I see a pin, that's the outside of my jacket. Now I'm going to take that one step further. When I have a front and a back, we talked about those notches. Most of the notches are either a one notch or a double notch. If I have a double notch, which signals that that is the back of the jacket, then instead of one pin, I'll put 2 pins here. If this is the front of the jacket, I will leave the 1 pin. 2 pins tells me that it's the back or the side back. And therefore, I'm not trying to get the side back to match up with the front and wondering why the pieces don't go together right. Because when you use the serger, when you serge all these pieces, you lose your notches. It's the one sad thing about using the serger. You lose all your notches, so you lose your markers. That is why I do the pins. 1 pin for the front, 2 pins for the back, side back. And in this particular pattern, the sleeve has 2 notches at the back and then 1 notch at the front. Some of the patterns have no notches because you can put them in front or back, there's no difference. This one there is a difference, so I will make sure that I put 2 notches where the back is, or one pin where the front is, 2 pins where the back notches, just so that I know where the front and the back is. This is the 1-inch strips of interfacing that I told you about. This has been applied to the fabric, the back side of the fabric. Follow your interfacing directions. There are multiple weights, there are multiple techniques. This happens to be Pellon, the craft bond. It requires steam. The important thing is, do not iron it. You're going to set the iron on it for a few seconds, lift and move down. Few seconds, lift and move down. If you iron, see what happens with the fabric? It scrunches. You're going to start fighting with it. And then, one of 2 things is going to happen. Because this is stretchy, when it goes back to its normal stance, it's going to scrunch this up. If you put too much heat on this, it's going to scrunch up and it's going to hold your lycra there. And then you're going to have an ugly front. So do it gently, do it right, and it will stay on. Now you notice that I have not serged this fabric, and you can see how it's having all kinds of fuzzy wuzzies all over the place. Do the same with your collar. It's the only 2 places you need interfacing in this jacket. But first thing we want to do is put our zipper in. Now this is one of the easiest ways ever to put a zipper in. I have my front pieces right side up, and I have my zipper. Notice my zipper is too long. First of all, how do I know that? Well, I don't have any hem down here, and I want at least 1 inch of hem. So I need to be up there. Well, okay, here's the top, and I'm sticking over that far. It's okay. It's very easily changed. If you can't find, this is why I said if you can't find the right size, then get a larger one. Because except for the hard plastic ones, these are very easy to adjust. Take your zipper. This is a separating zipper. And another thing I want you to look at is on some of these zippers, these bottoms, you've got the hard spot here. This particular one has another plastic piece right here. And there is no room for a needle to go between those. So you're going to have to stitch over here. If you ever seen somebody with a jacket and the stitching is going down and it goes whoop, 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 that's because they had to go around that. They didn't plan for that. Whatever you do, always make sure you plan for what you've got at the bottom of your zipper. Unlike closed zippers that go in skirts and pants, this is a separating zipper and it has this notch on the bottom, and you're just going to have to deal with it. The larger your zipper, size-wise, as like with the plastic ones, these are going to get bigger and more obnoxious and more of a pain. And it means you're going to have to be stitching further and further out away from the center. When you top stitch, you're going to be top stitching out here. You're not going to be right next to the zipper like you were taught. So just be aware of that. So I dropped my tape measure, so I'm going to guesstimate that this is 1 inch. Put your zipper on, just lay it on there, right side up. And now I'm going to freak you out totally. I'm going to tell you to turn your zipper over. Now you're going to stitch this. And you're already saying, that's not going to work. That's not the way it goes. Trust me. This is where you need to switch to your zipper foot. I actually have 2 different zipper foots for my machine. I have this one and I have this one. They are the same but different, but they are both zipper feet for my machine. I'm going to use this one and put the other one away. And you'll have to excuse me for a second, because while I was demonstrating things, I jammed my own thread. This is called a snap-on. If I'm sewing and accidentally hit this, that's going to come off. It's just that simple to put on and take off. The sole purpose of this set of stitching is to attach the zipper to the front of the shirt or jacket. I don't care too much about where I stitch it. All I care is that I get it attached. And it does help if you put the pins in the right way so you can pull them out when you get there. Remember to roll it forward, lift it, pull it out, and cut it. This is still the right side. Remember I told you to flip it down, so there's the wrong side of it. Now we're just going to take and roll this over. Finger press it. And what I want to show you is that I'm folding this fabric back up over to the center of the zipper. If you feel more comfortable with it, you can take this part off. And sometimes that's a better idea. Oops. Because as you're sewing, you'll get a visual as to whether that is the right place or not. If you're sewing along and you can't see any green out here, then the fabric has slid back on you. If you're sewing along and you have a lot of green out here, then it has scooched this way on you, and you don't want that. You want it right even with that. If you're uncomfortable pinning this, you can hand baste it. Not much point of doing it with the machine because we're going to top stitch this. And you get to the bottom. This time, you're going to keep going. You're going to go all the way to the bottom. Whatever you folded it here, you just fold it there. Keep going. And that's what it looks like. I just have a hint of green sticking out. Now you can sew this top to bottom or bottom to top. It doesn't matter. It just matters where you've got your presser foot. You always want the bulk of your fabric to your left. Because I'm working with a stretch fabric, I'm putting it down. I want the feed dogs to work. I want them to feed it through for me and keep it steady. Now you're going to get to see if I can do this straight. Pull your pins out. Now, I am at the hard plastic part. On this side, because it's the slide in, I can probably go right over it with my foot and I won't have to do anything special. But when I get to put the other side on where I've got that plug at the bottom, then you're going to see I will have to do something different. And we're going to do the same thing with the other side. I need to know. I always cut my threads off as I go along. I hate going back and getting them later. One of the reasons I actually like working with a longer zipper is I can get the slider totally out of my way. Remember, you're starting from the right side of the fabric, and you want to make sure that your tops and bottoms match up. Start with the teeth in. Turn them over so that they're away. Match up your fabric, match up your bottoms. Slide off camera here for a second. Pop it in. Remember, this is the stitch that just holds it on so I can roll it in. And you will find that with that interfacing, you don't have half the problems you'll have if you try to do this without. Doesn't stretch, doesn't pull. Now notice I'm down here at the bottom, and I kind of got to watch what I'm doing. See how it's caught and twisting? Just make sure your needle's down, lift that up, and it's designed to go over it, so we're okay. Once again, we're going to just roll this. Now we're not going to be able to cover up that knot totally, but we can try. And of course you're going to have a matching zipper, so it's not going to be quite as obvious as me with the white one. But this way you can actually see what I'm doing. Now I'm kind of worried about that, so I want to make sure I'm really straight because I don't want a bump lump around it. So I'm going to go real slow. And anytime you pick your presser foot up, make sure your needle is down and don't be fighting with your fabric. Hopefully I'm straight down there. Oh, I got a little bit of a woggle. I might go back and fix that, but it's pretty good. Now I'm going to zip this together and make sure I stayed straight. Because right now, if the top isn't even and the bottom isn't even, I'm going to be ripping some of this out and redoing it until it's right. I'm all for doing it right the first time. If you have problems like I just had with it sliding down, it's because you don't have it straight. You've allowed it to cant just a little bit. One of the biggest complaints people have is they lose their threads, or it comes unthreaded, or it balls up at the beginning of their seams. Well, right here is a take-up lever. And while I turn the wheel, you will see it go down and come back up. You want this to be at the height of your machine when you stop. Just automatically roll it up here so that when you start your next seam, you're good to go. And if you notice that this, it's in conjunction with your needle down here, and your needle will also be at its highest spot. People will tell you, hold on to your threads, for top and bottom threads, front and back, so that you don't have that problem. If you do this every single time, you won't have that problem, and you won't need to be reaching back there to hold your threads. Big pet peeve of mine, obviously, you can tell by my tone of voice. Second thing, your flywheel. Always, always, always turn it towards you. When you turn it back, it changes the mechanisms down here that have to hook the threads. And you're basically undoing it and putting gobs of thread down there. By turning it forward, you continue the process, and then you just bring this up and you're good to go. Obviously, this lever is your presser foot lever. When you're threading your machine, always, always, always have this up. If you have this down, so your presser foot is down, the tension discs that control the thread are closed, and you're trying to thread through them. Then you're fighting with your machine. If you have it up, it's the way it was intended to be done, thread your machine, and you're good to go. Start with a full bobbin. There's nothing worse than getting partway through and running out. And I really hate doing that when I'm doing a zipper. I get halfway down the top stitching and I want it perfect, and I think I did it perfect, and then I find out that I lost it halfway through and have to go back and do it again. I don't like doing that. All right, that was the basics of your machine. Depending upon the brand of your machine and the type of fabric you're using will determine the type of needle you're going to use. This is a Janome, and even though people recommend the stretch knit or ballpoint for Lycra, I get skip stitches with this machine. I don't know why, but I use a universal. You will have to experiment with your machine to find out whether the straight stitch, the stretch stitch, the ballpoint, the knit, or the universal works better for you when you're creating your garment. Size-wise, 10, they come in even numbers, 10, 12, is about a medium size. If you're doing anything thick, then you're going to want the 12, 14. Again, it's all relative to what you're doing and what your machine works with and what your fabric is. And for length, because I'm doing Lycra, my machine, the basting stitch, the longest stitch it has is a 4 on my machine, and I will sew with a 3. It doesn't have to be teeny tiny like we were taught to use on cotton. You can have it a little bit longer and it's just fine, and it will hold just as well. I'm Peg Johnson, and this is my model Taryn. She's going to allow me to measure her for a pair of chaps today. What you need is a measurement chart. Most of these charts will come with the chaps pattern. If not, if you stay with the video, you'll learn quickly which measurements you need to have. We're going to start with the natural waist. This is a measurement you're not going to use very much. It doesn't really affect anything with the chaps at all, but it's a marker guide for us. If you do chaps for another person and they send you the measurements, you'll be able to tell whether the measurements are in line with what that body should be. Just by having the waist measurement, it's just a good gauge. Next, you're going to go down about an inch below the natural waist. This is where the chaps are actually going to sit when you have them on, when you're standing up. When you sit down on the horse, they're going to rise up to the natural waist. So that's why you want them below the waist when you start out. Now, you need to put a marker here because you're going to use this measurement again. Now, I'm using a safety pin because Taryn doesn't like getting stuck with pins. So a safety pin is a nice thing to use. You can use chalk, anything else you want. You do not need a hip measurement because that is built into the chap. And besides, the butt's going to stick out. There's nothing there on the fabric of the chap, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay, if you want to turn sideways for me. The next measurement is going to be the upper thigh. Now this is going to be right up under the cheek of the butt at the crotch. This is where the top of the zipper is going to go, so it's really important that you have that accurate. Again, I'm going to put another marker there because this is a marker I'm going to use. I'll try not to put it through the body, just through the pants here. That is your upper thigh measurement. Then you're going to do the thigh measurement, which is basically halfway between there and the knee. So you can take that measurement, find your natural knee, take that measurement. You can take the calf measurement, and at this point you have to decide what kind of boots they're going to be wearing. Ropers, see her ropers are low here. A lot of the Western boots are wider, so you have to decide at what point those boots are going to come into play with the chaps, because if you do her leg without the boot on that she's going to wear, then the chap leg is going to be too tight. So we have here, and then we go on down to the ankle. The next measurement will be from here to here. This tells us basically the rise, about how far it needs to be from the crotch to the top of the chap when she's standing. The other measurement we need to determine our zipper length is the full back length. And this is where it's really important they have their boots on. From the cheek of the butt again, right in line with that marker, all the way down to the bottom. Now this is just a guide. See how she's got a heel on her boot. Typically when a person gets on their horse, they lose as much as 2 inches of length when they get on the horse. So a zipper that is this long when she's standing is actually going to hit her about here when she's on her horse. That is about the ankle. That's fine. Some people like them longer. So this is your guide. If you want a zipper that when you're on your horse goes all the way down here, you need to add length to your zipper. And that is the measurements that you need to make a chaps. All right, this is a copy of the chaps chart that I use. We've shown you a few of the measurements, but you'll take a look at here. There's a few more that we need to take. Number 1 is the natural waist that I showed you. On the chart is number 2 is the crotch to the floor, which is where I showed you the cheek of the butt to the floor with the boots on. Number 3 is the crotch to the knee. And that is so you can get the adjustment for the length of the thigh. Some people are longer or shorter. Number 4 is the chap waist we showed you. Number 5 is the rise we showed you, where we had the 2 markers on Taryn, where we went from the chap waist to the upper thigh. And then again, that is for the length of the body. Number 6 in this case is the thigh. Number 7 is the mid-thigh. 8 is the knee. 9 is the calf over your boot. 9A, which I don't have on the chart, is your ankle over your boot. And 10 is optional. 10 is actually the distance that you want your belt buckle to be. And this is especially important with a plus size person, and basically it's hip bone to hip bone. Once you have those measurements recorded, you're going to transfer them to your pattern like I told you before. But now you can see where each one of the numbers has to go. And the important part is that even though we use number 2 for the zipper length, it is also your front instep length. So it will go from the crotch to your instep. Now you can lengthen or shorten this as you like, but this is just a guide to get you to the right spot, because this point right here is going to be over the instep of your boot. Just transfer all the rest of the measurements as I had shown you before. This is your upper thigh, your mid-thigh, knee, calf, ankle. This is your crotch to knee, so that you get your long distance for your thigh bone. This is your rise, so that you get the correct height up to the top of your hip bone. For those of you who need to alter for plus sizing because the measurements here and here exceed the pattern, this is a very simple way to do it. Take your pattern and slash it in these 2 points, from here all the way down and from here all the way down. Then you're going to take and put paper behind it, or another fabric, or whatever you're using for your tracing. And you're going to spread these evenly until these measurements match what you need. And that is how you adjust for plus sizing. Now sometimes this is going to be way wide and this is going to be way narrow. So you're going to may have to fudge a little bit to get it to fit, but that is your basics, how you get that to fit a person that doesn't have the measurements that your pattern does. That's the end of today's pattern hacks and how-tos. I hope that you've learned something. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions for further DVDs, please feel free to contact me at information@showclothesunlimited.com. Thanks for viewing.